G'day, this is Chris Savage from RL Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this final session of the Book of Daniel. This is taken from a commentary by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, the founder of RL Ministries. I pray that this will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. Thank you for coming along. Well, this is the last session of the Book of Daniel, session 22. We're going to go from chapter 12, verse 2 to chapter 12, verse 13. Now, in the last session, we saw the death of the Antichrist during the conflict of his war against the 10 kings and in the middle of the tribulation. But Satan resurrects him back to life, and the other 7 kings after that, they submit to him, and he now rules the entire world. Daniel 10, at the time when persecution of the Jews now reaches its climax, Michael the archangel now wars against Satan and the fallen angels. While war breaks out on the earth between the Antichrist and the 10 kings, war will also break out in the atmospheric heavens between Michael the archangel and his good angels, and Satan and the demonic angels. Michael will be victorious, and Satan and his cohorts will be cast out of the atmospheric heavens and confined to the earth, and that's for the remainder of the tribulation, which is the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. And because his time is now short, 3.5 years, Satan goes all out to try and destroy the Jews. And this will be an especially severe time for the Jews and for Israel. But we know that Israel will survive as a nation. We're coming into today's session, and we're looking at verses 2 and 3 here. In verses 2 and 3, the angel prophetically dealt with the resurrection of 2 groups of humanity: the believers of the Hebrew Bible and the unbelievers. Now, the passage, we're going to look at it in 2 parts. We're going to look at the timing of the resurrection in verse 2 and the state of the resurrected saints in verse 3. In verse 2, we have the timing. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Now, the term sleep is used frequently in Scripture as a euphemism for death. We see it in John 11, verse 11 to 14, and also Acts chapter 7, verse 60. Now, the idea of sleeping in the dust of the earth goes right back to the curse in Genesis 3:19, where it says, "In the sweat of your face shall you eat bread till you return unto the ground. For out of it were you taken, for dust you are, and unto dust you shall return." So they're coming out of the dust of the earth. Hebrew term here for awake, kitz, K-I-T-Z. It is used to describe resurrection in Psalm 3, verse 5, and Isaiah 26:19, and Jeremiah 51:39 and 57. So what we're saying here is that after the tribulation, certain people will be resurrected. Now, who are they? Contextually, because remember, we're dealing with Daniel here, and we're dealing with Israel. So contextually, here Daniel is dealing not with the resurrection of the church saints, but with the resurrection of Israel. Now, the way it reads, it deals with 2 resurrections, because he talks about the resurrection of the righteous ones the righteous ones are going to go into everlasting life, and the others to shame and everlasting contempt. Now, the translation found in most English Bibles is not the best at this point, because there are various Hebrew nuances. They're not clearly brought out, because it does speak of 2 separate resurrections. Now, what are they? A very literal translation of this passage would be like this. It would be, "Many who are among the sleepers of the dust of the earth shall awake. These shall be unto everlasting life, but those," that is the rest of the sleepers, "who do not awake at this time shall be to shame and everlasting contempt." Now, as I said, the way most English translations have phrased this, it would indicate or it would imply the resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous occurs at the same time, but that's not the case. And this is actually why the amillennialists believe in only one general resurrection, ignoring that Revelation 20 clearly separates the resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous by a period of time. Hebrew text, which is what we're looking at here, if taken absolutely literally, does not indicate that the two resurrections occur at the same time. All right, so the wording of the Hebrew clearly implies that there will be some amount of time between the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the unrighteous. It just doesn't tell us how long. But we know that there's another passage that tells us that. So this passage here in verse 2 is dealing with the resurrection after the tribulation in preparation for the kingdom. So there'll be two groups of saints who will be resurrected after the second coming. Now, this first resurrection here has to do with the Old Testament saints. Isaiah, who lived more than a century, more than 100 years before Daniel, he prophesied in Isaiah 26:19 that the dead would be raised, right? He says, our dead shall live, meaning Israel's dead shall live. My dead bodies shall arise. Awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust, for your dew is as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast forth the dead. And so that's Isaiah telling us that. Now, the second group to be resurrected after the second coming will be the tribulation saints. And these are those who are killed in the tribulation. And we see this in Revelation chapter 20, verses 4 to 6. And this is what Revelation 24 to 6 says. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that had been beheaded for the testimony of Yeshua and for the word of God, and such as worship not the beast, neither his image, and received not the mark upon their forehead and upon their hand. And they lived and reigned with Messiah 1,000 years. And it goes on to say, the rest of the dead live not until the 1,000 years should be finished. This is the first resurrection. Now, church saints are resurrected sometime before the tribulation starts. And in this context, what we're seeing here in Daniel, he's not dealing with the resurrection of church saints, but with the resurrection of Israel. So there'll be an Israel that will survive the tribulation. Remember, Zechariah 13, 8-9 tells us 1/3 of the Jewish nation does survive. So those remaining alive in the Israel at the end of the tribulation will be joined by the resurrected Israel as well as the tribulation saints. So what's going to happen is they'll all live together for the first time. The Jews will all live together for the first time in the promised land. The Jews have never owned all of the promised land throughout Jewish history. But at that point, all of the promises of the Jewish covenants will now find their complete and total fulfillment. It says, many of them that sleep, many who are among the sleepers. Notice it does not say all, but it says many. This means that only the righteous ones will be resurrected at this time. The rest, the unrighteous, will be resurrected only after the 1,000 years of the kingdom have finished. And this same basic truth that there is to be a resurrection of unrighteous ones sometimes later, beyond the time when the righteous are resurrected, is at an event known as a Great White Throne Judgment. And we see this in Isaiah 24, verses 21 to 22, and Revelation 20, verse 5, and verses 12 to 14. So that tells us about the Great White Throne Judgment when the unrighteous will be resurrected. Now, here we see, so those are these, some in Daniel 12:2 who are being resurrected are the righteous ones from among the Old Testament and tribulation sleepers, and they're being resurrected to eternal or everlasting life. So this is the first mention we have here of this expression anywhere in the Old Testament. This event will conclude the first resurrection mentioned in Revelation 20, verses 4 to 6. This is concluded. Now, the term first resurrection, it's a general term meaning the resurrection of righteous ones and only righteous ones. And then we have the second resurrection consisting of those who are unbelievers. And they're the ones who, he says here in verse 12, in chapter 12, verse 2, which be resurrected to shame and everlasting contempt. So this shame and everlasting contempt This is the second resurrection, the resurrection of unbelievers only, and that will happen in 2 stages. Now, I've just put together a little, just a little sequence here of the first and second resurrections. Okay. The first resurrection, which is, the righteous ones, will have 5 stages. First stage has already happened because that was the resurrection of Jesus. That was the first stage of the first resurrection. And that is why Jesus, or Yeshua, is called the first fruits of the resurrection. And this we see in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 20 to 24. But now has Messiah been raised from the dead, the first fruits of them that are asleep. All right. And then it goes on to say there in verse 23, it says of 22, for as in Adam all die, so also in Messiah shall all be made alive, but each in his own order. Messiah the first fruits, then they that are Messiahs at his coming. Okay, so what we see here is that after declaring that a resurrection of the righteous will occur in this 1 Corinthians 15 passage, the passage states that the righteous will be each resurrected in his own order. And the word translated order here is a military term used for a sequence of troops or soldiers marching in a procession or in battle. There's one division of troops followed by another division of troops and so on. The point here is that the righteous will not all be resurrected at the same time, but rather in a definite sequential order. So the resurrection of Messiah, which is history, is the first stage. Second stage will be the resurrection of the church saints. So sometime before the tribulation, according to 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 to 17, and 1 Corinthians 15, 50 to 54. And then we have a third stage, will be the resurrection of the 2 witnesses in the middle of the tribulation, which we find in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verses 11 to 12. And in the fourth stage will come the saints of the Hebrew scriptures, which we touched on, Isaiah 26:19, Daniel 12:2. And these will be resurrected during that 75-day interval after the tribulation. We're going to come to that, 75 days. The fifth and last stage will be the resurrection of the tribulation saints, which we see in Revelation 20, verse 4. And that will complete the first resurrection, because no one else will be raised again for 1,000 years. There's no more righteous believers to be raised from the dead. They're all been resurrected. Now we come to the second resurrection. So that's the first resurrection in its 5 stages of the righteous. Now we come to the second resurrection, consisting of those who are unbelievers, the unrighteous. They're the ones, he says in Daniel 12, verse 2, which will be resurrected to shame and everlasting contempt. The shame and everlasting contempt is the second resurrection of unbelievers only, and that will happen in 2 stages. First stage will be the resurrection of the Antichrist. He'll be killed at the second coming of Messiah and resurrected shortly after, only then to be cast into the lake of fire together with the false prophet. We see that in Revelation 19, verse 20. Now we know that he was killed in a battle before and resurrected by Satan, but this one here, he's now resurrected to eternal life. And this is then Messiah kills him, Messiah resurrects him, and then casts him into the lake of fire for all eternity. So he'll be resurrected before the 1,000 years and then cast into the lake of fire. All the other unbelievers will be resurrected after the Messianic kingdom, after the millennium, the 1,000 years, and they'll be cast into the fire. The second resurrection is the resurrection of unbelievers only. Their souls or spirits will be relinquished from hell and will be reunited with their resurrected bodies. They'll then be judged at the great white throne judgment, which we see in Revelation 20, verse 5 and 11 to 15. They'll be judged on the basis of their works. And the sentence of this judgment will be followed by its execution, as Revelation 20, verses 14 and 15 show. And the second resurrection will soon give way to the second death in the lake of fire, which will be their eternal abode of the lost. So the significance of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 lies in the fact that it declares the reality of the resurrection in plain terms for the first time in Scripture, although the verse is far from the only mention of this resurrection of the dead. All right, now, verse 3 says, "And they that are wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." So in verse 3, we're now told about the state of the saints after they have been resurrected. They that are wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament. Now, in the Old Testament context, the difference between the wise and foolish is often their spiritual state. Those who are saved are called wise. Those who are unsaved are called foolish. Now, an example of this is seen in Psalm 14, verse 1. "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." So see, the fool says there is no God. So God's way is foolishness to a fool. For the word of the cross, this is 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us who are saved it is the power of God. Now, the word firmament, which we see here, means the expanse. It refers to the vault in the heavens with all its shining stars. So it's the sheen of the sky when all its stars are shining. That's what the expanse, the firmament, means here. So the brightness of the firmament, it's actually a symbol for the Shekinah glory in this context here. So the resurrected saints will reflect the Shekinah glory. Remember Moses, when he came down from the mountain, he reflected the Shekinah glory of God as well. And we see that in Exodus 34, 29 to 35. And this is going to be true of those that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. So these will be those who turn many to righteousness during the tribulation. Now, one example of this is the 144,000 Jewish evangelists of Revelation chapter 7. And as a reward for their labor of love, they'll have a special position in the Messianic kingdom, as Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 to 5 show us. It says, "They shall shine as the stars." Again, emphasis here is on the shining of the stars, which is another way of saying that the resurrected saints will be shining with the Shekinah glory during the tribulation. During the kingdom. During the kingdom. Now, it should be pointed out here, it says that not all the resurrected saints will have the shining ability. Two groups are specified here. They that are wise and they that instruct many. So it's basically those who have been active in their Christian life and those who have been fulfilling their mission as believers who will be the ones shining in this way. All we're saying here is that there'll be degrees of reward, all right? So all the righteous will be resurrected, all believers will be resurrected. And we see the sealing of the book in verse 4. "But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Now, what's he talking about here? Well, the vision that began back in chapter 10 officially ends here in chapter 12, verse 4, with the sealing of the book. Verse 4 actually ends the words of the prophecy which began at 11, verse 2. Now, he deals here with the sealing of the book. He says, "But you, O Daniel, shut up the words." The phrase "shut up" means to stop up or to keep closed. The words here have to do with all the words which began specifically in chapter 10, verse 1 through to chapter 12. So first of all, close off the words of chapter 10, 1 through chapter 12. And then once you've closed it off, once you've finished the prophecy, then seal the book, which means to affix a seal to it or to seal up. Now, this refers to the first 9 chapters which have already been written. So in other words, these words of chapters 10 to 12 are to be incorporated with the first 9 chapters, and then the whole thing is to be sealed. Now, what's the purpose of sealing the book? Well, why seal it? Well, by sealing the book, it will be kept safe and closed. But there's another important reason for sealing this book. It's because much of it would not be understood until the book of Revelation was given. So for a long period of time, the book of Daniel would not have been understood. Too many gaps are found in the information. But with the giving of the book of Revelation, those gaps have now been filled in. So when Daniel closes his book, he's told to seal it. But remember, when John, the Apostle John, closes his book of Revelation, he's specifically told not to seal it. Now, in Revelation 22, verse 10, John was told, seal not up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. So what made the difference? Well, Daniel was told to seal it up because it would not be understood in his day. There were too many gaps in the information. Neither was it intended specifically for Daniel's period. It was clearly intended for a time to come in the future. Now we have the book of Revelation, which completes the book of the Bible. It is the key to understanding Daniel. And so, as a result, the book of Revelation was to remain unsealed. And at that point, the seal on the book of Daniel was broken, typically speaking, so that we can now understand many things in the book of Daniel. Its content would be preserved especially for the period of the tribulation, because much of the revelation provided in chapters 10 to 12 concerns those who will be living during the tribulation time. They will need the information available in this book. And with the book of Daniel is now complete. Now we come to a phrase that has been terribly misused. Many shall run to and fro. Now, people have used this to refer to the modern ability to travel to and fro with cars and airplanes and scientific knowledge and so on. And they take that to be a sign of the end. But that's not what the words mean here. It does not mean to run to and fro in terms of traveling around the earth. It means to run to and fro in a quest for knowledge. This same phrase is used, for example, in 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9, and Jeremiah 5, verse 1, and Amos 8, verse 12, and also Zechariah 4, verse 10. Now, in these verses and these scriptures, people are running to and fro seeking knowledge. Not about computers and all that. They're seeking knowledge specifically about the end days in general, and specifically in this case about the book of Daniel. So he says that many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Now, again, the word knowledge here in Hebrew does not simply refer to an increase in general scientific knowledge, as it truly has increased in our days. We can't keep up with it. There has been an incredible expansion of our knowledge during the last century, in fact, during the last 10 years. But this is not what Daniel is talking about. So this cannot be used as a sign of the end either. This phrase is referring to an increased understanding of the book of Daniel. In the Hebrew, there is a definite article here, so that it refers not to knowledge in general, but specifically to the knowledge. The knowledge of the book of Daniel shall be increased. So while many shall run to and fro seeking knowledge about the end times, they will find it in the book of Daniel. And as their eyes begin to run to and fro while studying the book of Daniel, their knowledge will then be increased. This is just what we're talking about before the start of the lesson this morning. Many will run to and fro in their desire for knowledge in the last days. They'll find it in the book of Daniel, where it has been preserved to the end. Reading Daniel will lead to an increase in the knowledge of the end times. And that is really what verse 4 is dealing with. And the book of Daniel will be available to believers trying to survive the tribulation. By the time the angel Daniel by the time the angel gave Daniel the order to sit at the vision, chapters 1 to 9 had already been written. And with chapters 10 to 12, the book of Daniel was complete. The point of verse 4 is that Daniel would receive no more visions or revelations. The angel's statement was the last of it. Now, in the conclusion, we see in verses 5 to 13. The rest of Daniel 12 is now devoted to some conclusions which are now reached in these verses. First of all, we have a section here which tells us the extent and the purpose of the period. And this is verses 5 to 7. Verse 5, I'll read verses 5 to 7 for you. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on the brink of the river on this side, and the other on the brink of the river on that side. And one said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, How long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that lives for ever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when they have made an end of breaking in pieces the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. So in verses 5 to 7, Daniel, still studying the scene by the river, which he started back in chapter 10, verse 4, he discovered two individuals, one on either side of the river Tigris. In verse 5, we have the appearance of these two other angelic beings. He says, I, Daniel, looked, and there stood other two. So in addition to the high-ranking angel who had been talking with Daniel since chapter 10, there were now two others talking with him. The one on the brink of the river on this side, and the other on the brink of the river on that side. Now, Hebrew word Yaor for the river here is normally used of the river Nile, but here it means the river Tigris. The only other verse where Yeor, Y-E-O-R, does not refer to the Nile is Isaiah chapter 33, verse 21. So we have two more angels appearing, as well as the one talking to Daniel. One angel stood on one side of the Tigris, other angel stood on the other side of the Tigris. And now, these two angels, what are these two angels for? Well, these two angels had come to serve as witnesses, which we see in Deuteronomy 17:6 and Deuteronomy 19:15. You require 2 or 3 witnesses to confirm a situation. In verse 6, one of them raises a question which he puts to the man clothed in linen. So the angel who had been talking from the beginning of chapter 10 is now standing above the waters of the river. That means he's standing over the Tigris River, which would put him between the two angelic beings on either side. His question here is, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? So he wants to know how long or what length of time is involved. And these wonders refers to the vision which began in chapter 11, verse 36, and continued up to chapter 12, verse 4. How long would they continue? Well, the question really is, how long will be the duration of the persecution of the Jewish people? That's basically what the question is asking here. In verse 7, the answer is given. It's given by the man clothed in linen. He held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven to make an oath. Usually when an oath was made, only one hand was held up. There's an example of this in Genesis 14:22, Genesis 14:22, and Deuteronomy 32, verse 40. Deuteronomy 32:40. Now, the fact that this angel raised both his hands to heaven shows the solemnity of the oath he's about to make. And it goes on, he says, he swear by him that lives forever, so he's swearing by God Almighty, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half a time. So this is the same phrase as was used back in chapter 7, verse 25, dealing with the second half of the tribulation. So he makes an oath that this period of Jewish persecution is going to be for 3.5 years and no more than that. That is why in the book of Revelation we're given the exact number of days. From the day that the abomination of desolation is set up and the persecutions begin until the end of the tribulation will be exactly 1260 days and no more. It will not be 1261 days. This is confirmed by this oath. It's going to be time, times, and half. 3.5 years. And the solemnity of this is seen by the fact that this angel raises both his hands to heaven. Now, at the end of verse 7, we also learn what the purpose of this period is. It says, when they have made an end of breaking in pieces the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Hebrew word translated here, breaking in pieces, same word which is used in Psalm 2, verse 9. Psalm 2, verse 9, where it says, you shall break them with a rod of iron, you shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. And it's in Psalm 2, verse 9, it's talking about the Messiah breaking the nations in pieces. Messiah will break Gentile rule into pieces. Now, what we're saying here is that when these persecutions have finally broken the power of the holy people in pieces, the Jewish people will have been totally shattered by the forces of the Antichrist. So this refers to the Jewish people as a governmental state, all right? They'll be broken in pieces. But it means more than that. It emphasizes the aspect of their will. When the will of the whole people is finally broken, all these things shall be finished. Now, some of you might remember that a major purpose of the tribulation is to finally break the stubborn will of the Jewish people. And when they will turn away from seeking to establish their own righteousness, and now they will seek the righteousness of God through Messiah Yeshua, Messiah Jesus. Zechariah 12, verse 10. Zechariah 12:10. Now, the persecution here will last until their will is broken and they turn to the Messiah. And at that point, the nation of Israel will be regenerated, which we see in Zechariah 14, verses 1 to 21. Zechariah 14, 1 to 21. And then it says, these things shall be finished. This is a major purpose of the tribulation, is to bring about Israel's national salvation, their national regeneration. At the point where they are facing total and imminent annihilation, the tribulation is suddenly brought to an end, and those who remain will be saved. And according to Zechariah 13, verses 8 to 9, Zechariah 13, 8 to 9, all that remains is 1/3 of the entire Jewish population of that day. In verse 8, we now see Daniel's request. And I heard, but I understood not, as it happened to him once before. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the issue of these things? So the first question put by one of the two new angels was, how long will this period last? The answer was 3.5 years, 1260 days. Now, Daniel tells us that he says he didn't understand all that he had seen. So, as on other occasions, he makes a request, oh my Lord, what shall be the issue of these things? He asks for further clarification, as he did back in chapter 8, verse 15. He asked for it then, and he got it. He asked for it again in chapter 12, and this time he's refused. The word issue, which we see here, what shall be the issue of these things? It means what shall be the final outcome. He's not asking how long, because as the other angel had, but what will be the event which will bring all this to an end? Now, the answer is not given here, but elsewhere in the book of Daniel, and that event will be the second coming of Jesus Christ, which we saw back in chapter 7, verse 13. That in turn, although this is not mentioned in Daniel, is preceded by the national regeneration of Israel. And in answer to Daniel's question comes the response, which closes the book in verses 9 to 13. Now, Daniel did not receive a direct answer to his question. The angel did respond. This response will be covered in 5 parts. The sealing, which we see in verse 9, the wise and the wicked in verse 10, the 1290 days in verse 11, 1335 days in verse 12, and Daniel's future in verse 13. Now, the sealing we see in verse 9, and he said, this is the angel speaking to Daniel, he says, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed till the time of the end." Now, so in verse 9, we have the issue of the sealing of the book. Go your way. All right. He's told, basically, the angel tells Daniel, stop asking questions, right? And don't be concerned because you're not going to get any response from us. So he says, stop asking questions, move on. Now, in accordance with what we saw back in verse 4, the words of the prophecy had been shut up and sealed. Consequently, the answer was already present in the prior revelations. Now, these are the same words that were used back in verse 4. To shut up the words refers to chapters 10 through 12. Close them off and seal them up together with the words of the first 9 chapters of the book. That's what Daniel was told. So the angel is repeating what he told him before because, in some sense, the answer to Daniel's question is contained elsewhere in his book. But the reason the angel does not answer his question is because it is till the time of the end. In accordance with his statement back in verse 4 of chapter 12, more would become known later. Much of what had been revealed to Daniel was not meant for him or for his generation. Rather, it is meant for the future Jewish generation who will be living during the time of the Great Tribulation. So the angel tells Daniel to ask him no more questions for clarification because he'd give him no more answers. And then we see the wise and the wicked in verse 10. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but they that are wise shall understand. In verse 10, we come to the issue of the wise and the wicked. The angel here makes a distinction between them. The wise are the saints of the Great Tribulation. They shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined. Now, just as the saints living under Antiochus Epiphanes proved themselves to be refined and purified and made white back in chapter 11, verse 35, chapter 11:35. Just as the Maccabees did by means of their subjection to God, although it meant that they suffered death and persecution, so the same thing will be true again in the tribulation. And then he says, they that are wise shall understand. They'll comprehend what Daniel could not understand here in his book. Yet the reason for their knowledge will be because of what Daniel actually wrote in this book. So in the future, they'll understand because they're the wise, they're the believers. They'll understand because of what they read in the book of Daniel. As for the wicked, the unbelievers, they shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. Even later on, they still won't understand. During the tribulation, the wicked will have no idea what this is all about. They'll indeed experience all that is going on, but they'll not be able to understand God's program in light of those things, and so will fail to comprehend the significance of the events. In verse 11, we see a period of 1290 days. Now, it says here, and from the time that the continual burnt offering shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate be set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So now we know the tribulation will last 7 years, and each half of this period will have 1,260 days. So the beginning of this period of 1,290 days is when there will be a cessation of the continual burnt offering, and the abomination is now set up in the temple compound. This event is something Daniel had already been told about back in chapter 9, verse 27. That will be when the Antichrist takes over the Jewish temple. He will then break his covenant with Israel take over the temple compound, commit the abomination of desolation by setting up an image of himself in the very temple itself. And we see this in Revelation chapter 13, verses 14 to 15. Revelation 13, 14 to 15. From the time that the image is set up until it is destroyed will be exactly 1290 days. But from the time that the abomination of desolation is committed until the second coming will be precisely 1260 days. Here he gives us another number, 1290. That's an additional 30 days beyond the tribulation, the end of the tribulation. So this means that the abomination of desolation will be allowed to continue 30 days beyond the second coming and the end of the tribulation. The time that the image is set up until it's destroyed will be exactly 1290 days. But then in the next verse, we now have another number of days mentioned. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. So we have an additional 45 days beyond the 1290 days. This makes a total of 75 additional days beyond the second coming and the end of the tribulation. So what we have here in the book of Daniel is the understanding that from the end of the tribulation to the start of the messianic or millennial kingdom, there'll be exactly 75 days. There'll be the additional 30 days plus a further 45 days, making it 75 days. He goes on to say that the one who waits and attains to the 1335th day is going to be blessed. Now, so those who make it to that day will receive a special blessing, and this is the blessing of the Messianic kingdom, because that's when the Messianic kingdom starts. So between the end of the tribulation persecution, which lasts for 1260 days, and the start of the Messianic kingdom on the 1335th day, there'll be a period of 75 days. Purpose of this 75-day interval will be to make the world ready for the kingdom. Several things will be accomplished during that interval, one of which we already mentioned. First of all, the abomination of desolation will have to be removed 30 days after the end of the tribulation. We see that in Daniel 12, verse 11. Second, the Antichrist is going to be resurrected and cast into the lake of fire. We see that from Isaiah 14, 15 to 20 and Revelation 19, verse 20. Third, the false prophet who will serve as the counterfeit Holy Spirit in the tribulation will also be cast alive into the lake of fire. Again, Revelation 19, verse 20. And for 1,000 years, the Antichrist and the false prophet will be the only inhabitants of that lake. And then the fourth thing we will see it, is that Satan, who will serve as the counterfeit father in the tribulation, will be cast into the abyss. Revelation 20, verses 1 to 3. And then the fifth thing, though there's a great many Gentiles will be killed through the course of the tribulation, and Gentile armies will suffer slaughter in the campaign of Armageddon, a number will still be alive during the 75-day interval. And these Gentiles will now be gathered for a judgment. And this judgment is found in Joel chapter 3, verses 1 to 3, and Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46. The judge will be none other than Messiah himself, who will sit on the throne encompassed by his glory in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and all the Gentiles still living will be gathered before him. And in this judgment, the Gentiles will be divided into two camps. The pro-Semitic sheep camp, which we see in Matthew 25, verses 34 to 40, Matthew 25, 34 to 40, and then we see the anti-Semitic goat camp in Matthew 25, 41 to 46. Matthew 25, 41 to 46. The anti-Semites who will aid the Antichrist in the program of Jewish destruction will be killed and sent to hell. They are the ones who, according to Daniel 12, verse 12, will fail to attain the 1335th day, and consequently, they're going to lose out on the millennial blessing. The sixth thing we're going to see is that the saints of the Hebrew scriptures are going to be resurrected. Isaiah 26:19 and Daniel 12 verse 2 told us that. Seventh thing, the saints who will be killed in the course of the tribulation will also be resurrected. Revelation 20 verse 4. The eighth thing, the resurrection will be completed. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 20 to 23 and Revelation 20 verses 5 to 6. And then the ninth thing, the last thing, the marriage feast of the Lamb will be celebrated, which we see in Isaiah 25 6 to 8, Matthew 22 1 to 14, Matthew 25 1 to 13 and 31 to 46, and Revelation 19 verse 9. Now we see Daniel's future. But go your way, this is verse 13, but go your way till the end be, for you shall rest and shall stand in your lot at the end of the day. So the book now closes in verse 13, telling us about Daniel's future. The angel says, go your way. This is a reaffirmation of what he was told in verse 9. Again, here the angel reiterates here that there'll be no more information given to him. It says, till the end be. So go your way until the end be. Now, remember, the overarching theme of the book of Daniel was the times of the Gentiles. The end of that time span will be the actual end of the tribulation. Now, Daniel himself would not make it to that time because he would rest, meaning he would die. He says, for you shall rest. What he's saying here is reaffirming what he indicated back in verse 4, that this is Daniel's last revelation. And this phrase means that Daniel's going to die. He's already very old at this time. He's a man in his 80s at this time. So this is his last revelation. Finish the book, Daniel, for you must soon die. But then the angel goes on to say, but you shall stand in your lot at the end of the days. Now, the word lot means inheritance. So the phrase here, therefore, means that Daniel will stand in his inheritance. And this is mentioned back in chapter 12, verses 2 to 3, which includes the resurrection from the dead and the reward of the Shekinah glory radiance, and reflecting it in its outshining. Daniel, you're going to be resurrected, and that is part of his inheritance. So go your way, finish off the book and seal it. You'll soon die, but you'll experience the resurrection at the end of the days. That's paraphrasing what's going to be happening to Daniel. So after the times of the Gentiles, after the Great Tribulation, and during the 75-day interval he is just talking about, that is when Daniel will be resurrected. Daniel would receive the inheritance he was accorded as a reward for a life of service. And with these words, the book of Daniel comes to an end. Without this book, the book of Revelation would never be understood. But it is Revelation which gives us the key to unlock the meaning of Daniel's prophecies. What was sealed to Daniel and remained sealed for many centuries has now been unsealed to us. So we need to go and tell others what we have learned from the book of Daniel. So this brings us to the end of the study of the book of Daniel.